Unashamed, the recovery podcast.
And hello, recovery family. Welcome to a new season and another episode of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast, where it is okay to not be okay. I'm your host, Josh, an addict celebrating recovery from a 20-year porn and sex addiction. And new this season is my good friend and co-host, Drew.
Hey, Unashamed family. I'm Drew. I celebrate in recovery, and I deal with a 17-year life of addiction, life struggles, living a life of insanity as well.
On today's episode, we once again bring you a true story of redemption and hope in overcoming addiction. At the center of what the Unashamed Recovery Podcast is all about is breaking the shame and the stigma of addiction and recovery, one episode at a time.
And we're breaking that barrier by having honest and real conversations with real people and real recovery, by being unashamed and telling our stories, shining our light of freedom for those still trapped in the darkness.
These stories feature people who have faced a lifelong battle of addiction or hurts and habits and hang-ups, and they've hit rock bottom. They've overcame that hell of addiction, and they have found lasting sobriety, whatever that may look like for them. These stories are raw and unfiltered, but most importantly, they are real, to show others that we do recover and that there is hope and that there is life outside of addiction.
Now, these stories may contain adult language and adult content and may be a trigger. To keep these stories as real and true in nature as we can, we don't edit or cut anything out. We honor those who are willing to share by telling their whole story, even the dark parts, the ugly parts of it. So viewer discretion is advised.
Recovery fam, it is a proven fact that we heal once the shame is gone. And shame dies when we share our story in a safe place. And I hope that this podcast is a safe place for all, for those who are breaking their anonymity and breaking their shame by sharing, and also a safe place for everyone listening.
There is healing in sharing our secrets and our stories of addiction, our trials, our failures, and all of our powerlessness, and even more healing in hearing how others have recovered.
So, without further delay, let's meet today's guest. Hey, recovery fam, we do have a guest today. Our guest traveled a long way to be with us today. It's going to be Dana. And Dana, thank you for coming on the show and sitting here and talking to me and old Drew.
Hello, Dana.
That's Drew.
That's me.
If you didn't know already.
I'm Drew.
And so, Dana, for all of our listeners that probably do not know you, give them just a little bit of an insight, a background, a small little introduction of who Dana is, so they can kind of relate to you today.
Well, as I said, my name is Dana. I am 39 years old, and I'm a single mother of three.
Ooh, man.
I have a 19-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old. I didn't plan to be a single parent, but that's kind of how the cookie crumbled. I work full time, and I also am getting an active master's degree full time. So a lot of people always ask, where do I find the time? And it's like that old saying, you make time for the things that are important to you. So,
100%.
Other than that, I'm here because I struggle with, it started out as a porn addiction early on, and then kind of spiraled into a sex addiction. So that's what I'm here to talk about today.
So it's very interesting. Our last episode, we dived into my story, which was that of a porn and sex addiction from a man's point of view. And when Dana reached out to the show, I thought it very, very crucial to have her come on and share her story, because we don't talk about the porn and sex addiction from a woman's point of view. We don't talk about it hardly enough. And we forget that porn and sex addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer. It, like all addiction, it does not discriminate. It's not just a man's battle. And so whenever Dana reached out to the show, I was like, we got to get her on to share her story, because I know it's going to help so many other women out there. And so, Dana, as we move into your story, as we move into your testimony, you know, like all great stories, it's got a beginning. What does the beginning of Dana's story look like? What would chapter 1 be called for your story? The reason she's laughing is because I stalked you last week. Yes.
I remember Drew gave Josh a hard time about this one, but you know, after thinking about it and coming up with a few ideas, I think that I finally settled on the word unloved.
Right.
I wanted to say not enough, but really, you know, more just unloved. You know, that unloved feeling. Especially as a child that you're supposed to get, that, you know, is actually a building block to everything in your life.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So,
that's a good chapter 1. I like that. That's a good, what do you call that, a hook? That's a good one. So
it's that song, The Hook Brings Me Back. Right?
Yeah. So take us into that. What did childhood look like? What was that like?
well, you know, on the outside, I'm sure that some thought that, you know, I had a normal childhood. But on the inside, my family dynamic was a little different. My dad was an alcoholic. But a lot didn't know that because he always worked off. So, you know, we would see him three months at a time, sometimes 6 months at a time, sometimes once a year. It just kind of depended. So then, of course, we had my mom at home full time. And, you know, I always say that I don't want people to think that God does not restore relationships. So when I talk about my mother in the early years, I want everybody to remember that we as a whole are not in the same place that we were from my childhood. I've learned to, you know, let God restore that relationship. But early on, she just, I mean, I'm sure she did what she felt like she could do. But when I was 5 or 6, my oldest sister got diagnosed with cancer. So, of course, I was the middle child. So, you know, it was this ongoing, at the time they thought it was a joke, but it was this ongoing joke that I was the reason why my sister got sick all those years ago, because I came home with chicken pox and then she ended up in the hospital and it was this whole big mess. But when you tell that to a 6-year-old, you really don't realize it was almost the ball just kind of starting there, you know, like, because even at 6 years old, I harbored guilt from that, you know, feeling that I really did, you know, do really bad harm to, you know, my sister. During that time of our life, because my mom or when my dad was at home, they would put us off on other family members, you know, and probably around the age of 7 was the first time that I was ever molested by a family member. And of course, you know, people chop it up to, you know, they're experimenting, they're doing this, they're doing that. But, you know, really in actuality, when a child brings up this, it should really not be taken lightly.
Right.
You know, people should, you know, and of course, in our family, it was just kind of swept under the rug. Like, we don't have time to deal with it. You know, as they always said, I was the drama queen of the kids because I was the middle child. I was always seeking attention. So it was just kind of out of sight, out of mind. We've got other things to deal with. So then again, there is that moment in your life where you don't have anybody to talk to, even at 7. You know, yeah, what do? You just kind of, you start learning how to internalize everything and, put everything in. Well, this goes on until probably I was, 9, I would say. And then finally I got old enough where I was able to kind of voice my opinion and just stop going to that side of the family gatherings and things like that.
So it took all of that, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to run that in my brain.
And still to this day, when family, like if a family member dies, I still have to be in the room with them, but I have chalked it up to, I just because I'm in the same room with them doesn't mean that I have to associate with them.
Right.
And, and I felt like if I didn't, then I would never be able to get out of the hole that I had just buried myself in.
Right.
Yeah. I would say, so moving on, mom, I told y'all my dad worked off. Well, one night, when I was about 13, 14, my mom, kissed all of us goodnight and everything. We get up the next morning, my mom moved out overnight. I would say, my dad was in Ohio, another state. So of course, not only are we shocked that my mom moved out overnight, but here comes my grandmother, which is my dad's mom. She comes in and, throughout her whole life, she always tried to make sure that we went to church. She was the church person in our family. She relied heavily on the Lord. Neither one of my parents were real religious. Actually, believe it or not, I don't think I ever saw them in a church. It could have just been the fact that my dad was Methodist and my mom was Catholic. So they kind of, I know that's crazy. They even had to get permission to get married. So it was like a whole, it was like before I was even born that my religion needed to be decided for me. It's weird how that happens, but so that happens. Of course, we go almost 4 months without even hearing from my mom. She just kind of, and no, she's not, to answer any questions going through anybody's mind. No, she was not a drug abuser. She was not anything like that. I'm guessing that she just felt like she was overwhelmed and unhappy in her life, and that's what she felt like she needed to do. But the repercussions to that on the kids' end was I became really rebellious. She tried to come back after 4 months of being gone, and I just wasn't having it. No, you're not going to tell me what to do. You're not going to, at this time I had a job and, had a way of going, and, it was what it was. I'm going to do what I want to do. Right, independent. Because I felt like if I didn't fend for myself, nobody else was.
Yeah, you already being competent for yourself. They say it's joking.
Right.
Once again, that's one of those things that kind of sit in, and you're already feeling like you're alone.
Right.
Because they're blaming you or joking about your sister getting cancer from
right.
chicken pox. So it's almost a passive blame.
Right.
But in your mindset at 6, that's kind of like, well, that's what they're saying about them. They don't care, because we do a lot of negative self-talk. But.
Right. So, probably by the age of, about the age of 16,
right.
I got my first job. I was so excited, everything else. And of course, at this point in time, you're 16, you're living life, things are what they are. Well, you look for things that you wanted out of your parents from everybody in your life, so friends, I looked at friends differently, and I always had in my life more male friends than I ever had female friends because I just felt like I related with them more than I did females. To me, females were just too emotional and, and so, of course, then you get a label all on its own, because I'm a female and I'm 16 and I want to hang out with the guys. But of course, that was actually the first time that I was ever actually sexually assaulted by a friend that I trusted. I will say this, whatever situation you put yourself in, it doesn't warrant when you say no, that means no. So, friend or no friend. So, of course, my dad found out about that, and and we did what we could. It was, somebody that was the only town, and he did end up going to jail. But there again at 16, I don't know if my parents just didn't know how to help or whatever. It just kind of it was like a snowball effect. Like I'm still here to fend for myself because nobody is doing really anything productive to help the situation. They're just like, why are you acting this way?
Right.
So,
And so, to kind of put a little perspective in, we're talking southern Mississippi,
Right.
probably what, mid to late 90s?
right, in a small town.
And, I mean, and to be fair, well, I'm not going to say because there's no excuse, but still, just until recently, in Mississippi, we haven't had tools, resources. So a lot of parents didn't know how can I help?
Right.
I mean, they just, there wasn't the knowledge that we have nowadays. And it's no excuse.
People weren't as open either.
This is true.
To discuss. Like you said, internalizing became a major tool.
Yes.
For a lot of people, even people that are quite at fault
Right.
for what had happened. As far as parental guidance wise. It becomes one of those things, and I'm not justifying anybody's actions because we're having to use that's tragic.
So, and you're once again, you're being independent, and so where does that go from there?
Well, during this time, I did have a best guy friend, and his father was a preacher. So at that time, because my grandmother, she'd always take us to church. Actually, through all of this turmoil, I became saved. But when you're 16, almost 17, what does saved really look like? They don't really, I mean, they tell you, yes, you take the Lord into your heart, things like that. But it's not like they give you a class on what an actual Christian is supposed to look like. So it's just kind of, okay, you're saved. Let's go to church, but then I got church hurt because the one preacher that I felt like helped me more than anything, which is the one that saved me, which he didn't save me, the Lord saved me, but the one that actually tried to help, the church got rid of. It was, and that happens a lot in Southern Baptist, world. So,
You decided on Baptist.
yes.
So to answer everybody's question out there.
To answer everybody's question out there, I was the black sheep of the family and I was Baptist. And it was more the fact that they couldn't answer my questions in Catholic
Right.
church. Like, I had questions. Why do we preach to Mother Mary? Like, I had questions and they don't like questions. Just put that out there. I got saved, but then I got my feelings hurt again because then I felt like the few people that I did put in my life that were there on my side just kept getting taken from me. So, you asked what it looked like. Well, in 99, which was the year I graduated, I actually got to go to Paris, France. Hey, for my senior trip, which was, and the only reason I was allowed to go was because my memo, she felt like it was going to be a great experience because they're Catholic over there, and she was Catholic, and so right. So she felt like it was a great idea, and and to this day, it was a great experience. It was it was a great experience. But when I got back, that is when I guess you could say my adult life kind of started to change. I had applied for junior college. So even though I'd been on my own for the longest time, I was actually out of the house on my own, and everything. Well, I met someone right after I got back. And, they always say that the Lord puts people in your life for either a blessing or a lesson. And I would have to say to this day, 20 years later, that this person in my life was a blessing and a lesson all at the same time. Right. It wasn't one or the other, it was a little bit of both, but I wouldn't know that until later in life. But anyways, his name was Benji. We started dating. Great guy all the way around, worshiped the ground I walked on. And for the first time in my life, he just bombarded me with all these emotions that I didn't know anything about. So of course, here I am over here, Miss Independent, like you're not going to tell me what to do, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. He just wanted to love me. Right. He just wanted to do something that was foreign to me at the time. So,
because you've been so used to the exact opposite.
Right. So I was pretty horrible to him, but every single time it never failed for the whole almost 2 years we dated. No matter how horrible I was to him, he always showed me grace and mercy and always forgave me and came back. Now, of course, that changed in the end of 2000. We got into an argument. He wanted me to come home from school. It sounds simple enough at my age, but I told him no. That I would, if he wanted to see me, he could come to me. We got into an argument, and I said some things that I probably shouldn't have said, and pretty much told him that I didn't want to speak to him anymore. Well, the next day, I felt bad, like always. Like, let's just feel bad. It was this process. It's like a toxic relationship, but I was the toxic one at this time, and he I called to apologize. He didn't answer the phone. Well, the next afternoon, for whatever reason, for college students to be watching the news, I'm not real sure, but the news was on. And in that moment, my life stopped. There was a news article where he had died. And he had the same name as his dad. So let me backtrack 2 seconds. When I saw the news article, they didn't specify whether it was his dad or it was him because they had the same exact name. So of course, as soon as I saw it, I picked up the phone and I called his house because back then we didn't really have cell phones like we do now. So I had to call his house phone. And in that moment, my life legitly stopped. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience because his dad was the one that answered the phone. So, of course, then, I was already, in my life guilted with all these other things. So now I have this situation that I really just haven't at 18, 19 years old that I don't even know how to deal with, how to process. So everybody in my life is like, well, you've got to deal with it. You've got to hit it head on. Head on. I mean, I remember.
That's the scariest thing to do, because I had a girl from hospital. And so the hardest part for me was to actually face it. I ran from it.
Well, and that's what I would say. I went to the funeral, and I remember it, like it was yesterday. It's weird how you could remember things like that. But I remember it like it was yesterday. They made me go in there, and they made me see him in that casket, just laying there. Like, I felt like like I said, it was like an out of body experience, like, and then of course at this time, and a lot of people don't know this, but, we're going to be transparent here. My best friend at the time, of course, talked me into going out and drinking the night of the funeral. She felt like I needed to kind of clear my mind. Of course, we were 18, 19, so, I was like, no, I didn't think so, but she kind of talked me into it, peer pressure. Well, the next morning, I woke up beside someone that I didn't even know. She was supposed to be my, ride or die that evening, and I don't know where she ended up at. And I'm not blaming her because, things happen for a reason. But a month later, I find out that I'm pregnant with my first child. So it was just like one thing after another. Like you just could not breathe. You just could not. It's like you're in a pool of water suffocating and you just don't know how to. So you just put it all down and you get used to, even at a young age, putting that face on and saying, I'm okay, because that's what everybody expected me to be. So that was probably, after I found out that I got pregnant, my parents made me marry the guy that got me pregnant. Didn't know anything about him really. We were married less than a year. So for listeners out there, there are other options other than getting married when you get pregnant. Don't make it the situation worse. We're great co-parents. But that's probably where porn started for me. It had always kind of been in the back of my mind, but my next husband, he liked it, which is my other two kids' dad. And back then in our day, you could go to the movie gallery, and I don't know, right, and go to the back room, and they had the 5 for 5, or whatever it was, and next thing you know, you just have this whole collection, and you just get lost. And you just don't really think anything of it, and in the beginning it was with my husband. So, it was kind of, but then I found myself, it was like I used it as a release for everything else. It was like he didn't have to even be around. And, I was curious about it, or I was reading about it, or I needed to know more about it. So, through that marriage, that was probably, as bad as I hate to say, was probably the best thing that came out of the marriage, because he had a drinking problem, and we ended up separating in 2014 because he could not control his anger. And so after we divorced, I went, and that was really, here we are, okay, 2014. That was really the first time that I had ever been alone since Benji died.
Right.
Because I just used it as an excuse, like I had to have somebody in my life, but everybody that I kept picking from my life, I picked because I felt like I needed to be punished for the way that I treated him.
So you were building yourself behind self-worth through people.
Yes, pretty much. Like I felt like I was physically, that the Lord was mad at me, and that I felt like no matter what I did, everything that happened to me, I deserved, because the one person that he put in my life that actually showed me true love, I ruined it. I sabotaged it. I self-sabotaged.
So I completely understand where you're going with the problem. I grew up in a gospel, and so I always had this image of God sitting on the corner of his seat with a lightning bolt ready to strike me down in a mistake. That was kind of the image that I had growing up. And so, for those that don't know my story, you can go back and listen to our last episode. My porn addiction led to having affairs with my wife. And so, after all the dust settled, my wife did not leave. She stayed. And we actually had our second daughter after that. And when she was born, about 2 months after she was born, she just wouldn't eat and wound up having a feeding tube put in. And we were talking about doing surgery on it. And I carried enormous guilt. I thought that this was my punishment and that this is what I got. I thought the sins of
the father
Yes.
carries it.
Yes, and I carried so much of that. I carried a lot of it. And so I know what you're like. I understand, like 100%. I get what you're saying. Like when you're carrying that kind of guilt, it eats at you. So
It started out as a small hole. It started out as a small hole, and in through this now, there were but God moments. When I got pregnant with my daughter in my second marriage, something happened in one of the sonograms when I was about 6 months pregnant, and we had to go see a specialist. And between 6 and 7 months, the specialist tried to talk me into having an abortion because they thought that, my daughter was going to have Downs and she had fluid on her kidneys and there was something wrong with her heart. And I remember every night sitting in the bathtub, bawling my eyes out, praying that I would do anything if he would just get her here safely. Like, I deserve the guilt. I deserve the shame, but don't take my sins out on my kids. And that sounds crazy, but that was the prayer that I prayed to him. Not, will you do this because of this, but it was more of, just let me be the one that carries the burden, not my kids, not my kids. And, and the crazy thing is she was born. The morning of, they still said the same thing. I go into labor. They take her away for like 3 or 4 hours. We don't know anything. You know kids, so we're just sitting there waiting. And the doctor comes in and he just looks and he says, I don't know how. He said, but you have a perfectly healthy daughter. And in that moment, I was thankful to God, but I didn't understand because then I just felt like, okay, well, he listened and I need to be aware of what my punishment is going to be now. It's still on me. It's
Right.
still on.
It's coming.
Right.
Right which corner.
Right. So where is the next obstacle coming from? And, and that's the way that I felt. So of course, like I said, me and my husband separated in 2014. Well, for the first time ever, I was alone. So somebody, here again, I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to friends, but, choose your friends wisely. I had a friend introduce me to dating online because I work so much and, I got kids and who goes to the bar anymore? I don't really know, but anyways, yeah, I would say, but what they didn't realize is the place that I was at in my life opened a whole new doorway that I didn't even realize until I was right smack in the middle of it. And that was free reign on men. Like it was like, and I hate to sound like this, but it was like going to the buffet and you're just able to, pick and choose, and I didn't have to worry about being enough because I knew that if I did one thing and I was in control, that for that moment, I would feel complete. It's like gambling. You know, you go and you put the quarter in the slot and you hear all the quarters drop. So it's like, it's a complete high. But what they don't explain to you is with that complete high that you get that absolute low. If you know, and then it just continues on. Like you find yourself, you know, it started with one situation, you know, and then, you know, throughout, the situation, you know, it started off slow. You know, I tried dating. I tried to do the right thing in the beginning. Like, let's date, have a real, I didn't even know what a real relationship was, but let's try. And it was like, no matter what I did, they always wanted one thing. And if they didn't get it, then they were moving on. It was, you know, it's a perception that is put out there, like, especially when you get to a certain age in life. I didn't get the memo at the time. I didn't get the memo at the time. Well, because of online dating, you know, they don't tell you you're not supposed to put certain pictures on your profile. I thought it was like Facebook. You know, you just put a selfie up and you don't think about it. Well, I had put some pictures on there with my work uniform on it and ended up getting a stalker and didn't even realize it until October of 2017 when he decided to show up at my house.
That took a big turn.
A big turn. Well, in that moment, I was actually sexually assaulted for the third time. And carried a good bit of PTSD to begin with, in that situation. You know, I just kept, unlike the first two, you know, I was at a point in my life where I just kept replaying the situation over and over again. Could I handle things differently? Could I have done something differently to get a different outcome? And of course, at this time, in my thinking process, of course, now I know was not correct, but in my mind, the only thing that I could come up with conclusion-wise is, well, stop telling them no. Stop telling them no.
Since I was having such an adverse.
Right, because it was like it was not working anyway. So, and it wasn't like I didn't enjoy it when I did, or, you know, or it wasn't always on my mind. I mean, I would even talk about it at work. I would, you know, like the girls at work, I was always known as the 50 Shades girl because, like, when it came to the topic, I was like a dictionary. I knew everything. Red light, green light, go. You know, it didn't really matter. And, you know, as crazy as it sounds, I really felt like the captain of the football team. Like, it gave me this enormous amount, right, for the right.
Yeah, so after feeling so alone, you know, and feeling so torn away from family and everything else, that was at one time people were actually listening. People actually were interested in everything that you had to say. Granted, it was on the spectrum of, you know,
Right.
the sex addiction that you were already in the classroom grips of at that point in time, but to feel accepted in the middle of that, you know, then people that you put your trust in, you're losing. You know, these are rude people that you want to be rude people, people that you can rely on to come in the network. But yet, these are people that just leave.
Right.
You know, and then so you finally get a group of women, peers, that are entwined into this.
Right, and they're listening.
Yeah.
But on the same level, they're judging.
Yeah.
You know, and so then it was like one of those things where, okay, because it hurt from the judgment that they were given, I just stopped telling them. It was like out of sight, out of mind. You know, I remember, Josh, that you said something in your testimony that really stuck with me. You know, it's easy to see a person that does meth or that does, you know, or that drinks. It's easy to see them relapse. It's easy to see what they go through. It's easy to see if they're having an issue. But in our world, it was easier to sweep it under the rug, especially when you live in a small town, and I live 5 minutes outside of town, and there's no neighbors. I could do what I wanted to do. Now, I will say that, I felt like I was doing no wrong because I never once brought my kids into it. Like, nobody ever knew where other than the one guy that out of my, but nobody ever came to my house. Nobody ever, what I did away from the house.
Right.
And that's how I rationalized it. Like, guys, and then it even goes back to the quid pro quo. Guys do it all the time and they don't get hated for it. So what's wrong with me doing it and enjoying it? I made every excuse known to man to make what I was doing okay to other people. But what they didn't see on the inside is even though I called myself enjoying it, I hated it just as much. It's like a two-sided coin. You have heads and you have tails. There were great moments in it, but at the same time, every single time I did it, I hated myself more because I didn't know how to stop.
Right.
It was like I needed that feeling of wantedness. It's like I almost enjoyed the chase more than I enjoyed the actual act because of the interaction with the person,
Because
the lead up to it,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
it's almost becomes itself.
Right.
Because somebody's important and they're giving you the best self.
Yep. And it's also when you struggle with the feeling of being alone for all your life, and all of a sudden you're feeling wanted.
Right.
And you kind of make it about yourself.
You did. I became selfish.
And
Well, most addictions are going to be self gratifying stuff.
Right. I definitely became selfish. If I was realistic, and because the Lord knows this, and I became peace with myself. If I sat down and was actually honest, I could have probably. It used to be an ongoing joke, but I probably could have had a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, and none of them would have ever known about it. It was just as simple as that. It was like clockwork, and you almost don't even think about it. When you get in it, it's like shooting heroin. You don't even think about it. You just do it. It becomes a job. It's routine. It's happened. It's the norm, to you.
so during all of this time, what was that porn use like? Were you still depending on porn, or were you
Oh yeah, I tried to integrate it when I could. I even got so crazy with it that I actually decided to sell pure romance and actually did sex parties. I took it to a whole new level. I guess my thing is if I'm going to do it, I'm going to embrace it. And, but of course, there in my mind, I'm still rationalizing it. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Guys do it all the time. They can get away with it. So why can I not be the same?
Right.
Why does it have to be an issue? And still at this time, I didn't really, even know anything about sex addiction. It was just one of those things where, if anything, I was thinking that I was addicted to the feeling, the emotion. But when you get out of that storm and you're actually able to see when the clouds lift what was actually going on, it's a completely different outlook on things.
So I can see this progression of things just going downhill, and we call it different things, but what did that rock bottom look like in your story? Because I can see where it's on a crash course.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Well, rock bottom started, probably, shortly after my last assault. I still went out and did things, but in my mind, I was safer about things. Like I would meet the person in public and, and things like that. And, I called myself having safety guards up, quote, quote. But my depression had gotten like really, really out of hand. And I've always suffered, with depression. The thing about depression is sometimes it peaks, sometimes it doesn't. You know, I suffered with it when I was, in high school and took medicine, but I didn't always take medicine. It was, whatever. But I remember that I had an old prescription of depression medication and a 9 millimeter. And one morning I got up and it was like I just couldn't breathe. I could not breathe. And in that moment, they say that you don't ask for help, but you really do. Because in that moment, I called a friend and I told them, look, I'm about to do this. I cannot do this anymore. I had failed. I had failed as a mother. I took on, and I didn't even bring this up, but I took on my ex-husband's meth addiction when we got separated. So it was a ball rolling. Like I was still harboring all this guilt, everything. And I'm only one person. And so, I had the gun and I was planning on using it. And then my daughter came in. It was about God moment. But I didn't listen. I was still stubborn, but I would say that is kind of where the ball started rolling. Because then, I had kind of reached out a few more times in my addiction to different guys. Well, I had one that, here again, not all of the guys in my life were not, I guess, quote, quote, the word for them in 2021 are friends with benefits. A lot of them, I would like to call friends, but we know that they're not, because when you get out of addiction, you can't be friends with, but in that, I would consider them friends, but really what they were just repeats. And while I had one that I had already messed around with, well, I decided, he reached out and I decided to go out with him. And in the midst of things, something in my mind told me not to, that it just wasn't the right time. Well, during that date, there again, another friend of mine says it's a sexual assault because I said no to certain parts of things and I agreed to certain parts of things. The line gets blurred. So, but in that moment was my breaking point. Because instead of acting out from this assault, I needed to find the real root of what was wrong. Like, why am I putting myself into these situations and making myself suffer? Why? Just why? So in that, I, like I said, I had a conversation with a friend, and she, for months, had every Saturday night, it was like clockwork. She would text me, she'd be like, hey, you want to come to church tomorrow? You want to come? So it wasn't like the Lord had not been trying. Okay, it was like, but in my, the whole life, I was just stubborn, independent. I felt like I could fix myself on my own. Like, it was a God person that can fix me. Like, I don't, And so on that night, instead of her messaging me, I sent her a message and I said, hey, are you going to church tomorrow? And she was like, yeah. She was like all excited. She was like, yeah. And I was like, all right, I'll be there at 9:30. Because before then, I had just made every excuse in the book why not to go. Like, I pray on occasion, but why do I need to be in the building? And that was the way that I looked at things, But I got up, and on that morning, when I walked into overflow, And, at first I didn't feel any different. And, they always say that when the Lord talks to you, you feel convicted. You feel convicted. Well, I really felt like Brother Paul that day was like talking directly to me. Like I was the only person in the room. And if it wasn't even much worse, the worship team actually sung a song by Hillsong, Good Grace. Yeah, and
You didn't stand a chance that morning.
yeah, I didn't stand a chance that morning. Because the one verse that stood out to me in that whole song was, fix your eyes on one truth, that God is madly in love with you. And at the end of that sermon, I legitimately could not walk because I sat there and I bawled my eyes out for the longest time. People say that you got to go to the altar to surrender. That's not always the truth, because I wasn't making it to the altar, but I surrendered. And that is actually where I first met someone off the leadership team of Celebrate Recovery. They were the only person in church that morning that actually stopped and asked if I was okay and asked if they could pray with me. Still bawling my eyes out like a little 2-year-old. I was like, what is wrong with me? At that point I still didn't understand, but at the same time, it was like, once it started coming out, it was just like you just couldn't write. It was just like you couldn't stop. And so she invited me to Celebrate Recovery on Thursday night. And I was like, all right, I'll try it out. I'm going to try it out, And it was like, oh my gosh, where have these people been all my life? Like, you go in and you stay. Like, it's so funny because in my first small groups, I was like, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk. And they get to your name, and you're like, it just comes out of your mouth. Like, it's like you're telling all these secrets that you have held for so long, and then when you realize that lightning didn't strike and they did not shame you, and a week, and the crazy thing is even after the first time I ever spoke in small groups, I waited in town because we're in a small town. They tell you that what happens in small groups stays in small groups. Well, how many times have you heard that in your life? And then grandma gets on the phone with grandma, and then everybody, so I was really.
Most of the time, when I was doing that was a great experience because every time I told somebody something, most of the time it came back.
Right, and that's, I was like, okay, so it was like the first time that I ever shared in small groups. It was like I waited that whole week and a half for like the shoe to drop. Like, did somebody tell my business? Like, I was just waiting on it. And it never happened. And then you go back in and they're still hugging you and they're still showing you what grace is really like, what hope is like. And, and that's a completely different high. I mean, it was definitely surreal in that moment,
Know that you're being accepted no matter how dark your past.
Well, my thing is I felt like it wasn't so much the being accepted part, it was the fact that I was being accepted, one, without strings, and two, well, that and that I was accepted in a fact where it was a good accepted. In my addiction, yes, I was wanted and I was needed, but I was not wanted and needed in the way that I truly wanted and needed. Because it was like no matter what I did, that hole was still there. And it's like it's just like in any addiction. You're not going to fill that hole until you get to the root of what is really going on. And, even my other but God moment was right after I went to Overflow for that first time. And of course, I've been to Overflow. I'm now an active member. I volunteer on the leadership team, for our recovery group there.
Shout out to Lifeline.
Right, Lifeline. But shortly after that first initial morning, the church offered grief share classes. And, something that I did not know 20 years ago, and I just learned is that grief can snowball an addiction, in a lot of people, because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know what the signs are. They don't know what is the norm and how the norm is to act. And they're just pushed either quicker than they're supposed to be. Like, let's just go back to normal, and that's, right. Right. Like, oh, you should be over it by now. Well, no. How do you get over a guilt and a shame when you can't have a conversation with that person anymore? And right, like, so grief share was also, on top of the Celebrate Recovery and the church itself, grief share was a lifeline to me at that time, because I learned a lot of the things that I did, the acting out and the things like that, even at 19, had a lot to do with pushing me into my addiction. I mean, there were other triggers here, but it kind of just all kind of worked. It's just my life, my story. And, I know everybody's is different, but that's kind of how it happened for me.
So, you got into Celebrate Recovery, help with, that's what recovery looked like for you in grief share. So, what are you doing now? How long have you been sober now?
Sober. I am making better decisions now for running 18 months.
Okay,
that's
amazing. Awesome. So in these 18 months, besides the Celebrate Recovery, which y'all are not Celebrate Recovery anymore, y'all are just
we are Lifeline
now. So aside from Lifeline and aside from that grief share, what are some things that you have replaced in your life to keep you sober?
Well, let's just say, some might not ever agree with this. Some went to recovery, like rehab. Some went to, but I'm pretty stubborn, and as y'all have heard in my story, I just quit cold turkey. I made a decision, and that's what I was going to do, and that's, in a sense, that's what because I have to get up every morning and make a decision. Am I going, because let me tell you, the devil has not stopped just because I decided to make a decision. If anything, sometimes he tempts me, and it's like the apple on the tree. He tempts me in different ways than he used to. But one of the biggest things that keeps me busy, other than church and volunteering with Lifeline, is and my kids, of course, is I graduated in June with my bachelor's in psychology of addictions. I'm actually in my master's program for psychology of addictions. So hopefully I have less than a year left, and I'm going for a doctorate.
Okay.
So I feel like knowledge is power, and something that has also helped me in addiction is just I didn't go through all the 12 steps before they swapped over to from Celebrate Recovery to Lifeline. And it seems to me like no matter where I go, even when I visited your Celebrate Recovery, I always catch it at the oddest times, like you're on number 8 or you're on number 9. So I've never actually called it in the order that it is supposed to go. But I will tell you the one thing that really stuck with me is, me and the Lord every night do a personal inventory check, and I do that in prayer because, even if I faltered or even if I did something that I feel like might have been a fine line as to a question or a concern, I take it and I'm honest with him and I'm like, okay, obviously I think I might need to still work on this a little bit. So, and ask him to guide me, to show me, to help me better myself, because the better person that I am is the better parent that my kids are. And when I'm the only one that they rely on, that's the healthiness in me. I need to be healthy and 100% for them instead of greater than.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah. True. That's where the hope is. Like that, to go from 6 years old and being told you're raising your sister got cancer, and then your mom, and sexual assaults, all the things that's happened, and to end up where you're at now, back to work on, finish up your master's, get your, like, man, that's hope for anybody out there who's still in that darkness and addiction. Like, that is the biggest ray of, man, you are a lighthouse. You are a lighthouse of hope to those that are drowning in the hopelessness and in the darkness of addiction. And I cannot thank you enough for taking that step forward and to join us here and to share all this. It's been an emotional ride. And if your story isn't a fiery example of hope, man, I don't know what is. And, as we do at the end of every episode, we got a couple questions for you.
Okay.
We're going to end with a couple of them. Number one, what is the biggest thing that you have taken away from your own story? What are some lessons learned?
Well, I did learn at an early age that I wasn't going to be like my parents. And, and not to be funny in that sense, I even said that I wasn't having kids, but God decided that I needed kids, and I would not give them for the world because, a lot of days they are my lifeline. They are my lifeline. They are my hope and my light. But I had to make a conscious decision that I was not going to be my parents. I was not, because I didn't want, that was always my fear. I did not want my kids to have that unloved feeling, and I didn't want to be the cause of it. I just did not, So I would probably say that would be my biggest lesson in that.
Now, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that can relate to that probably can. Yeah, that's right. So, number two, what would you tell somebody going through the same exact thing that you came out of?
I thought I had this answer in my head, before I got here. But, the biggest thing that I would say is don't give up. Don't stop pushing. Your time is coming. You just have to grab a hold of it. Your story's not over.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that they're just in a chapter of their life, and, there's a whole end of the book waiting for them if they just turn the page.
So many people that get trapped and don't want to turn the page, and basically in the chapter there. So, yeah. Yeah. So I got a couple of questions for myself.
Okay. Go ahead, Drew.
So what impact do you think the old you has on the new you?
Ooh. You know, believe it or not, I think the old me holds me more accountable to the new me. I find myself, like I said, on a daily basis, checking myself, like, because, well, and it's because, they always say that you don't see the growth until you're standing outside the growth, and I always, do not get me wrong, even on bad days, I look at myself like I feel like I failed. But realistically, when I sit down and I hold myself accountable and look at the person that I used to be compared to the person that I am today, that is where the growth and the change come from. Because if you're not changing, you're not growing. And if there's not movement in that change, then you're not growing. And that is where hope comes from. You have, is to watch other people shine and to watch and hear other people's recovery and that's what hope is about. It really is.
That's so. Just hearing your story from, like Josh was saying earlier, from being 6 years old and pretty much that whole psyche of being unwanted then to now getting a master. I mean, that right there is an inspiration on its own. That's one of those things that you really start to talk to people and try to inspire and encourage people. People always think, well, I'm an addict, I can't go do this, or I've been in addiction, I can't go do that. But the whole thing is your story right now is telling everybody, hey, look, it never stops where you think it stops, unless you put your best foot forward. That change that you want to happen won't change because you're not putting your best foot forward.
Right.
You made a conscientious decision to say, no more. I will not live like this anymore. Of course, with the help of God, the help of, your recovery family, and with the help of, CR and Lifeline.
And grief share.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are tools, man, that, not a lot of people realize that are really beneficial, especially grief share. I'm glad you mentioned that because there's so many people that are grieving things they don't even realize are grieving it until they actually start to open up and admit and talk about these things. That it's just I'm glad you came to talk to us, Dana. I'm inspired by your story. I might not have dealt with the same things in the same fashion, but addiction is addiction. And everybody thinks it starts with drugs, it ends with drugs, No, addiction can mean anything.
What did Sean say? Anything that you can't pass from, you're a slave to.
Yeah. Well, and my thing is, my dad was an alcoholic, so I knew to stay away from alcohol because if I enjoyed alcohol way too much, then it would be an issue. So, but when you're young, and especially in that time, time now in 2021 is completely different. Addiction is a lot more out there. Like they talk about it.
Because they're talking about more mental health issues.
Right, but back then they didn't explain to you that, well, you might not have alcoholism, but there's a whole book of other addictions that you because you have that personality.
Right. So if you had that one person that you wanted to reach, so basically we call this your 15 minutes of fame. Open mic. Your open mic. That's it. The open mic.
We're copyrighted right now.
But yes, to reach that one person, just like this podcast, we shoot to reach one person. There's so many times that we try to grasp too much and get everybody, but it's really about the one. Jesus even comes back and tells you, I left the 99 for the one.
Right.
What would be your words to that one person? looking for that beat of hope, that's trying to live unashamed as well?
I think that I would just say that we're meant to be imperfect. That's what Jesus died for on the cross, because we were imperfect and we were going to sin and we were going to mess up. But when I think about it, it's going to sound crazy, but I am thankful to have a father that loves like he loved Jacob. He loved me in my struggles. He never forsakes me. I might have not seen him, but it's like when you go into your grandma's house when I was young, you had that footprint sign in every bathroom.
Everybody's grandma has that.
Well, at least in the southern states, okay. You go in the bathroom and you had, the footprints and the whole scripture of footprints. And but you really don't grasp that until you feel that, or until you see that, until you go through that. And I guess my biggest thing to show hope and to tell that one person is you might feel like you're at the deepest, darkest part of your life, and you might feel like you're alone. But in this world, you are never alone. You might not physically see them, but there is someone standing there rooting for you to just stand up and say, you've had enough. This is it. I do not want to live like this. I want a different life. That's it. That's, even if it's not the Lord, there is, Mother Mary there is, just know that there is a whole life out there past your addiction that is just waiting on you. It's a freedom like no other, like Chainbreaker, the song. I'm a song fanatic. That is the absolute truth. I struggle still every day about feeling like I'm not enough. But at the end of the day, all that matters is I know that I'm enough for the one person that I need to be enough for. And that's the Lord. Because he loves me regardless of whether or not I feel like I'm not enough or not. So just know that there's hope, there is light, and it is just waiting for you to grab a hold of it.
With that, y'all, that winds up all the time that we have today. I want to take this time to once again thank our guest, Dana, for stopping by and sharing and being here with me and Drew. And I sincerely hope that today's episode has shined some ray of hope for you and has been a blessing for you. I hope it has had some type of encouragement for you. Don't forget that you can always join the recovery conversation with us on Twitter. You can find us at Unashamed Recovery. That's Unashamed Recovery on Twitter. You can also use the hashtag Recovery Posse to connect with thousands and thousands of other people in the recovery community worldwide. And do you want to be a guest on the show like our guest today, Dana, was? Or do you want to be able to share your amazing story with our listeners from all around the world? Or maybe you just want to tell us how well that we're doing, or maybe how well we're not doing. Or maybe you have a question. You can always send us an email at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. That's unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. And Dana, if somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe get you to come share at their recovery group, or maybe they want you to come be on their recovery podcast, or maybe there's somebody out there who's going through the same thing that they want to reach out and ask for some help. What is the best way for somebody to get contact?
Well, I'm going to say, I used to say Facebook, but for Lent, I'm giving up social media, so. But I would say my email address, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's dana.hall51@yahoo.com. And I'll make sure that Josh and Drew have that if anybody reaches out.
We'll be putting that in the show notes of the podcast and in the show notes of the YouTube video. I'll be able to click that and there'll be a link. And with that, y'all, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your continued support of this podcast. And I hope that y'all all continue to stay sober. And until next time, we love y'all and remember to be unashamed. Love you guys.
Hey, Recovery fam. It's your two favorite hosts again.
What's up, guys?
It's Josh and Drew. That's Drew. I'm Josh.
Are you sure I'm Drew?
Guys, we want to come to you today and talk about a great resource that is available to everybody. It started here in East Mississippi, but it is worldwide, and that is Rise Up Christian Counseling. That's Rise Up Christian Counseling. They are a tremendous partner with us here on the podcast.
So the thing about Rise Up Christian Counseling is it's virtual counseling that's available for trauma, mental health, addiction, couples counseling, anything that you're dealing with. They got a virtual setup, man. It's pretty amazing.
Drew, how much does Rise Up Christian Counseling cost?
Hold on, let me think on that. Oh, it's free, guys.
That-
it is free.
That is
It's
capital FREE exclamation point. Free. Nada. Zip to you. It is a free resource that is available. So what is your excuse? If you're struggling, you don't have an excuse. Go to these guys. Drew, what is that website? Do they have a website?
I think it's riseupchristiancounseling.com. Riseupchristiancounseling.com. That's it.
Man.
So one more time, riseupchristiancounseling.com. And not only is it free and it's virtual counseling, but they do handle everything from a biblical standpoint, which is amazing. It's an amazing concept, and it's an amazing tool that's available out there for everybody. So there aren't any excuses.
And you do not have to be a Christian to take advantage of this. Just because they're coming from a biblical standpoint, that's just an added bonus. But you do not have to be a Christian to take advantage of Rise Up Christian Counseling.
What was the age on that? How old do you have to be?
That's 18 years and up. 18 years and up can take advantage of Rise Up Christian Counseling. And guys, I hope you do take advantage of this. Me and the owner, we have talked about this. We have spent a lot of time chatting about it, and I'm excited. He's excited. Go check them out today. Rise Up Christian Counseling.
And that's riseupchristiancounseling.com.
That's right.
Go look them up, guys. All right, we love you.
Love you. Peace. And with that, y'all, that's all the time we have for today. We hope that today's episode has shined some ray of hope and encouragement for you. We hope that it has inspired you to not give up and that you too can have a life outside of addiction and can have lasting sobriety.
Recovery fam, don't forget that you can always join us for more recovery conversations on Twitter. Find us at Unashamed Recovery and also use the hashtag Recovery Posse to connect with thousands and thousands of others in the Twitter recovery community worldwide.
Do you want to be on the show to share your amazing story with listeners from around the world like our guest today did?
Or maybe simply you want to tell us how we're doing. Or do you have any suggestions or questions for me for the show?
Send the show an email at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. That's unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com.
Thank you for your continued support of the podcast, and I hope you all continue to stay sober. And until next time, we love you, and y'all remember to be unashamed.